Well, let's. It's been a couple weeks. I again apologize for last week, but I appreciate your willingness to let me postpone last week so I could be part of our elder meeting. There we go. But tonight, or this morning, excuse me, it's nighttime here in the States, but morning time for you guys.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Evening,
Well,
Pastor Team.
now we can get started. William's here.
Thank you.
Actually, I just prayed, so you haven't missed anything. So let's just jump right in. We're gonna actually move on today from our poetic analysis. We've been uh-oh, my battery's getting low. Give me 1 second. I gotta plug in my computer.
Nice background.
Hello, brothers and pastors. Good morning sa inyo tanan. Hope everybody's okay.
Morning.
Hapon kay kaginapay, Will. Hapon kay kaginapay, Will.
Ganda ng
Salamat sa Ginoo, Pastor.
All right. Sorry about that. My computer just gave me a warning. I was going to run out of power. This morning, we're actually going to move from our poetic analysis into some hopefully more familiar territory for you guys. We've been spending a lot of time the last several weeks on the poetic analysis. And again, those 5 steps that we've been making our way through slowly but surely are the read and observe, the setting and structure of the poem. Then we looked at parallelism. Then we spent a number of weeks on the imagery, the poetic devices. And then the last step is to take all of that information and essentially identify or summarize at this point what we think the theme of the poem is. That is, what is the main point of this poem? And then to summarize what we see as each stanza of the poem. All right, we're not yet done completely with the exegetical process, but what I like to do is at this point, after we've done the poetic analysis, is just to step back and assess, determine, think about what the main point of the poem seems to be and how it is structured. And then we'll come back to this, of course, at the end of our exegetical process when we look at the author's, it's hard to, what, why, and how. You can see it right there in the middle of the diagram here. All right, so right now we're at the very end of our poetic analysis. So what I'd like to do is we're going to summarize where we're at in the poem, the theme of it, each stanza. Before we do that, we're going to read it as we've been doing each week, and I'll have you again we'll take 3 verses each, and we'll start with German. If you could read verses 1 to 3, and then Brother Ruel, verses 4 to 6, and John, if you want to read verses 7 through 9, all right? Go ahead, Brother German.
Verse 1, the Lord reigns, let the peoples tremble. He is enthroned above the cherubim, let the earth shake. The Lord is great in Zion, and he is exalted above all the peoples. Let them praise your great and awesome name. Holy is he.
Okay, Brother Ruel.
The strength of the king loves justice. You have established equity. You have executed justice and righteousness in Jacob. Exalt the Lord our God and worship at his footstool. Holy is he. Moses and Aaron were among his priests, and Samuel was among those who called on his name. They called upon the Lord, and he answered them.
He spoke to them in the pillar of cloud. They kept his testimonies and the statute that he gave them. O Lord our God, you answered them. You were a forgiving God to them, and yet an avenger of their evil deeds. Exalt the Lord our God and worship at his holy hill, for holy is the Lord our God.
Great, thank you. So here we have all 9 verses of this poem, and again we've analyzed it from various aspects: the parallelism, the imagery, the figures of speech, We've looked at, I read it in a few translations, made several observations. So now what we want to do is identify, in the last step of poetic analysis, is what appears to be the main theme of this poem, at least at this point. What do we see here? And again, we would summarize in a sentence. All right. Anyone want to make an attempt at what do you see as the main theme? What have we been talking about the last several weeks? What's the focus of this poem?
The holiness of God.
Okay, the focus is the holiness of God. Good. Right? We see that in the refrain and the repetition, don't we?
Yeah.
All right. And what about the holiness of God? It declares God is holy, but does this psalm tell us to do anything in response to that?
So
Yes.
to exalt and worship.
Yeah,
Worship.
exalt, worship God
because of his holiness.
because he is holy.
Holy.
Yeah. I think that captures it pretty well.
Yes.
Exalt. And we could go back and look at the poem here, right? We see this idea, let them praise, right? There's a command, holy is he. And then in verse 5, exalt the Lord our God, worship at his footstool, holy is he.
Verse 7.
And then verse
9.
9, exalt the Lord our God, worship at his holy hill, holy is Yahweh our God. So we see that same idea expressed 3 times. Exalt and worship, praise, exalt and worship, because God is holy. All right? I think that there's some other things mentioned in this psalm, but that's the thing that's repeated over and over. Okay? Does everybody see that? Any questions? I think it's pretty straightforward. So something like, what I highlighted here would be a good summary at this point in our study. Now, as we look back at, oops, got the verse numbers wrong here. As we look back at the stanzas where we had identified these are the 3 stanzas in the poem, let's look back at those for a minute and see what specific details are mentioned here. So we're in the first stanza here. All right. How would we summarize this stanza? Again, it has the idea of praise or worship God because he's holy, but what is mentioned here about God? That
About his greatness.
Yeah, there's an idea of God's greatness.
He reigns.
He is enthroned.
Lord
He
reigns.
Yeah, he reigns, enthroned. His name is great and awesome, right?
He is
Yeah.
exalted.
So these are declarations made about God. And then verse 3 says, let them praise. That can be the idea of worship as well, correct? It's not the same word used, but it's that idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
So something along the lines of praise, or we could say worship God for what? Or because what?
For his greatness.
He is high and lifted up.
Yeah, for his greatness,
For his kingly reign.
his kingly reign. That's good. I like that. Something like this. Okay? Something along those lines. But you see, right, we can see, notice the repetition here. Reigns, enthroned, great, exalted. Right? That's clearly a focus here, right? God is great. He's exalted. Could have put that here. Okay, and so that's the focus. God is great. He is kingly. So praise or worship him. All right, I think I'd throw this in. Something like that. Okay, So that's it. That's all we're doing here is just identifying a simple sentence in our own words that captures the idea. We'll make, we'll keep studying more and reinforce this as we go along. And then when we get to the point where we want to determine the sermon, of course, we'll refine it even more. But at this step, we're just identifying the basic elements that seem to be the focus of each stanza. Okay. All right, well, let's go to the second stanza and do the same thing. All right, the second stanza is verses 4 and 5, because again, remember, each stanza ended with the same refrain, holy is he, and each stanza had this idea of some declarations about God and then ended with the command to exalt and worship God. So that's how we identified the three stanzas. All right, so for the second stanza, what is the focus here?
God's justice.
Yeah, again, notice the repetition. God's justice is the emphasis here.
Equity.
You see that? Notice we have justice, equity,
justice, and
justice,
Righteousness.
righteousness. Now they're different words, but they're a similar idea. Okay? So, and then the command here in verse 5 to exalt the Lord our God and to worship at his footstool because he's holy. So here, how would we summarize this stanza? What would you say?
Because of his justice.
So
Because
exalt or worship God because,
for he is just and righteous.
yeah, we'll just say for he is just. Okay? Again, we're just going for a simple summary. Okay, you see that? All right, because we've earlier noticed the pattern which told us what the stanzas were, now we can just focus on each stanza like we did before when we were summarizing paragraphs in the epistles. Is we can now just take, okay, what's in this stanza, what seems to be emphasized and focused upon, and notice in the first stanza, we saw the repetition of this idea of God's greatness. Oops, I didn't mean to underline that. I'm just highlighting. Right? I mean, it's clearly the psalmist was emphasizing his God's greatness in that first stanza. And then clearly here, by repetition again, he's emphasizing God's justice. So, and then we have the command. So verse 4 gives all the declarations about God's justice. Verse 5 then tells us how do we respond to that? Exalt and worship. All right? Now, any questions there? Does that make sense? Can you guys see that? Okay. All right, let's move to the last stanza, verses 6 through 9. We'll do the same thing. What's the focus here?
God's mercy.
Yeah, God's mercy as expressed how?
Answering prayers, forgiving.
Yeah. See that? Notice it says, Moses, Aaron, Samuel called on his name, so they prayed to him. They called, so again, this idea of prayer, and he answered. And then notice he spoke. And then again, you answered. And then forgiving, but also just. So that justice is snuck in here a little bit, but clearly the focus here is the fact that people prayed, God heard. And not only did he hear, he responded. And then notice again, the call to exalt and worship, holy is the Lord our God. So how might we summarize this stanza? Again, we see the idea of exalt and worship, right? That's the response.
Worship God because He is merciful.
Yeah, for maybe we could just put his mercy or because he's merciful, something like that. And then the way he shows that mercy is in listening to
Prayer.
these intercessory prayers and responding. Okay?
Mm.
Now, how Moses and Aaron and Samuel fit in, and what's this pillar of cloud, and that stuff we'll get to. But
Illustration.
at least we see a general idea here. Hopefully, we can all see it. This idea of people crying out to God, God responding, answering, speaking, and responding. Okay, and then again, this call to, we see the first 3 verses make these declarations about God, and then verse 9 is the call and how to respond, exalt and worship. So if we were to take, let's just take these 3 stanzas here. I'm just going to copy them. We'll put them down here.
Excuse me,
Yes.
Pastor Tim.
Yes.
Are you sharing your screen?
Sorry?
Are you
Yeah,
sharing your screen?
I am. You can't see it?
Yeah, I was not able to view it.
Can the rest of you see the screen?
Yes, yes, we see it.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
let me
see it.
clear.
let me
So clear.
restart it. I'll reshare it and see maybe if that'll help. All right, stop. Let me try again. Okay. Let me know when you guys see it.
Yes, I see it.
Yes, we see
See
it.
it.
Okay, Jess, do you see it?
No,
Oh,
my connection. Sir,
Maybe you're on another meeting.
Just maybe on your setup, you need to change it. There's a option there for the view. Maybe
yeah,
you click the speaker's view, just transfer it to.
the option speakers view. No.
Or on
Uh,
top of your screen, the view options, you can click the side-by-side mode. So you
Yeah,
can see us on the other side and you can see the screen on the other side.
yeah, it's already on the side by side mode. I didn't
And then
know
it's
that.
blank. Mm.
Yeah, it's just black.
oh
But
really?
Yeah,
Oh, that's weird.
Kasi
Can
mo
you try
screen
to,
ko ba?
can you try to reconnect, Pastor
Yeah.
Jess?
Why don't you
Reconnect.
leave the meeting and then come back? See if maybe if that will help. Okay. So the main theme, at least again, this is preliminary. We're not ready to preach yet, but what we've seen to this point is a exuberant, emotional declaration for God's people to exalt and worship God because he is holy. And that holiness is expressed in 3 particular ways in the psalm. The first stanza focuses on God's greatness, the second on his justice, and the third stanza on his mercy, his care. All right? So, again, this is preliminary. This is kind of just what we can see to this point, but I think we're starting to hone in and zero in our focus a little more. We're going to continue to do the rest of the steps of the process after that. So this is the final step in our poetic analysis, where we bring together everything we studied to this point and identify what appears to be the main theme, and then also summarize each stanza. Now we're back to our figure. We've completed the poetic analysis. We're now ready for the next step, and it's a familiar one that I think is everybody's favorite step, right?
Pastor
Amen,
Ruel's
amen,
Right.
amen, amen.
Yes. Preach it, brother. I see that hand. All right. The structural diagram. Now, you might want to ask, well, wait, I thought we were doing poetry. Isn't structural diagramming more for epistles? I mean, we didn't really do much of it for narrative. It's not a step that you would utilize very much in narratives, a lot in epistles, but do we really need to do it in poetry? Well, again, remember, poetry is essentially expressing biblical truth, but the way it's expressed is in a more figurative fashion, more imagery. It's not like a story. A story is not being told. Images are being described, which convey biblical truth. Now, in an epistle, that biblical truth is expressed directly. In an epistle, it would just simply be, you know, God is exalted and should be praised because he's holy. Well, in the psalm, that's the idea, but it's expressed in a more emotional, impactful way. And the way that it's done is the author is still using words and phrases and connecting them together using the rules of grammar for the most part. And so what the structural or block diagram does is allows us to see how these phrases are connected between the verses. When we looked before, in fact, let me just skip to this point. We're going to do the structural diagram. We had parallelism, but parallelism caused us or allowed us to focus. Parallelism examines the relationship of phrases and clauses within each verse. All right, that within is an important distinction. Okay, the structural diagram examines the relationships of
Within.
phrases
Stanzas.
and clauses between each verse,
All right.
as well as within. But between, it shows us the connections between a verse. Parallelism focuses on the verse itself, right? As we've talked about, Hebrew poetry, one of the key attributes or elements is parallelism, and that just helps us to think about how does each line within a verse relate to each other. But the structural diagram goes beyond that. It looks at the phrases and clauses not just in one verse, but in all the verses, and then we examine the relationship between the verses, not just within each verse. All right, so that's where structural diagramming can help yield some more some fruitful understanding of the poem, because we're going to be looking at more than just each verse by itself. Okay, and I'll show you what that is in a minute, but before we do that, let's just jump right into doing a real quick structural diagram review, because you know, I know most of you are doing this every morning when you wake up, right? The first thing you did this morning was the structural diagram before anything, I'm sure, right? You got out of bed and right? I know you guys. I know how dedicated you are to this. So, but for some of us, maybe we haven't done it as often. So I want to do a short, quick review of this, and then we'll look at Psalm 99 together. All right. Now, structural diagramming, again, the idea is identifying. The first thing we do is identify the phrases or the clauses. That is the short statements that are used, and we identify those, and then we identify them by finding the connector words. All right. And there are a few types of connector words. Can you guys remember? We talked about this in class a couple times. What
Prepositions.
prepositions?
Conjunctions.
Okay, well, let's start with the prepositions, right? By, with, in, upon,
Into.
through, at, right? According to, under. Okay, these are all
Within.
examples. What's that?
Within.
Then
Yeah, within. Okay, there's a huge list. What you can do is, you know, you can go on the internet and just look up English prepositions. Print out that list. Okay, there's many websites, and they'll just dump. There's so many prepositions. All right, but they function as a connector word. In fact, they're probably among the most common connector words, where they connect one phrase or clause to another. All right. Now, I heard someone else mention, what's a second kind of connector word?
Conjunctions.
Good. Conjunctions, also very common, right? But, and, therefore, so that,
Although.
although, right?
However.
However, All right. So, for, okay, because, again, look up, you can look up on a website, just look up English conjunctions, all right? And you can get a full list of those as well, okay? We don't have to go over all of them here. All right? And conjunctions also serve as a connector word, linking phrases or clauses together. Now, when I say phrase or clause, maybe I should clarify this. A clause contains a verb. A phrase does not contain a verb. Okay? That's the only difference. So a clause contains a verb, which means it will also have a subject. But a phrase does not necessarily contain a verb. All right? So, but we don't really need to worry about the distinction, because all we're going to be looking at is the words that form either a phrase or a clause that are connected by these connector words. All right? So don't worry too much about the definitions there. Now, there's another kind of connector word. Prepositions and conjunctions are by far the most common. Do you guys remember? There's a couple of others that are less common, but we will see them. Who are my English grammar scholars here? Anyone remember? I'll give you a hint. It's two words. The first one is relative.
Relative
Pronoun.
There you go.
pronoun and relative verb.
Who, which,
What?
whom, or that. Those are the
That.
most common. All right.
Mm,
And then there's another kind of, it's not really it sort of functions like a connector word.
Participles.
These are the verbs with that have the ing or the ed endings. All right. And then last but not least, another way we can identify phrases or clauses is just look at the punctuation. Okay, now remember, this is a translator's interpretation, because in the original interpretation, in the original language, there's not punctuation. Okay, the original Hebrew and Greek, when it was written, did not contain punctuation. All right, they were just the words. And in Greek, many of the epistles were written in what's called uncial form, which means essentially it would look like this. I think we looked at an example in class, but I'll just do it in English. They would have, I want to tell or to pray for your health and safety today. All right? That's what it would look like. Just blocks of letters, no spaces, all the way down the page in order to save space, because paper was expensive. So there was no punctuation, no spaces even. But the translators, when they translated the Bible, English translators put in punctuation. Okay? That's interpretive. Right? That's their interpretation. Now they're using solid rules of grammar and such to identify that, but that's why you'll see some English translations will have a comma where another one will have a period. But we can use punctuation to help us, right? There's commas, period, semicolon, question mark, all these things, right? That's a last resort, okay? But you're welcome to use the punctuation as a help to identify the phrases or clauses. But the first thing we want to look for are the connector words, okay? Prepositions, conjunctions, relative pronouns, participles, and then finally the punctuation can be useful for us, okay? All right, any questions yet on that? We okay so far? So the first thing we're looking for is we have a passage. The first thing we want to do is identify the phrases and clauses. Well, how do we do that? We look for the connector words. Okay? So, for example, let's do this for John 3.
Mo naman siya picturean ang kuan.
All right. Is everybody muted here? Make sure to mute yourself. All right. Let's just take for God so loved the world. Okay. Where is let me ask, I'll just go around. Let's see. Brother Norel, can you tell me where the next phrase is? Obviously, for God so loved the world that he gave. Where does that phrase end and the next one begin? Do you see a connector word?
Yes. So.
Okay. Yeah, in this case, though, it's for God so loved. It's part of the verb there, right? Loved.
The word direct object.
Yeah, you see that? Here, that. There's a connector word. And the translation even put a comma in there for us to help us out. But the connector word is that. All right? Jess, you want to find the next connector word that tells us where this phrase ends?
That whatever.
Oh, you're muted.
The that and the comma.
Yep. Can you see okay now? Can you see the...
Yeah, yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. That whoever believes in him. Okay. John, where does this phrase end?
But
In
Whoever believes in it. But.
Yeah, but. We got some help in this translation, right? We got the commas there to help us out as well. But notice we see the connector words, that, and but. Okay? So that's all we do in this step. We just take the passage and then break it down by each phrase. And each phrase we can find by looking for the connector words, or, like I said, punctuation can help us as well. Now, the second step is identifying what does that phrase now that we've identified the phrases, what does it modify? What is that phrase modifying, and how does it modify it? And here I talked about there are certain questions you want to ask for each phrase. One set of questions is how, when, where, why, what condition, what is the result or purpose. Okay? If the phrase answers one of these kinds of questions, it's going to be modifying a verb. Okay? These phrases modify a verb, or they are what's called adverbial. Okay? So if you look at a particular phrase, you ask yourself the question, what kind of question does this phrase answer? Does it tell me how, or when, or where, or why? And then if it is one of those questions, then you know that that phrase is modifying an action. It's modifying a verb. It's telling us how a verb happened, or when it happened, or where, or the result of that verb, that action. All right, there's another set of questions.
Noun.
Okay, how many? All right, these questions, yeah, these
noun.
modify a noun, or the smart people say they're adjectival. All right, so when you have a phrase that answers a question who, or which one, or how many, or what kind, that's going to be modifying a noun. All right, so once we determine that, then we essentially indent each phrase and clause under the word that it modifies. So let's go back to our example in John 3:16. Here we've identified each of the clauses, so they're going to be on their own line. And now we're going to move the next clause over to the location, to the place, to the word that it's modifying. All right? So here, for example, we have for God, and then I like to underline the verb, so loved the world. Now, this next phrase, that,
Loved.
What question is that answering?
How?
It's a verb.
Maybe
It
how?
modifies,
How did he love the
Why?
world?
Or
it
why?
modifies verb.
Why?
Why?
Or,
Not why.
no, not
No.
why.
Yeah, no,
He
no,
didn't
no.
love it because he gave his only son. He loved it by giving his
purpose.
only son.
Or that's why.
Yeah, I think, well,
That's why.
that's not why he loved the world. That's why he gave his son.
That's why. Yeah. Not why.
Okay. But how he loved the world is that he gave his only begotten son. And again, I like to underline the verbs. Now, this next one, that whoever believes. What kind of question does this answer?
Reason.
A
How?
reason? Yeah, I think so. Reason for
The word.
Giving.
giving. Okay, I'm going to have to decrease the font size so it'll fit on one line here. Sorry, hopefully you can see that. And notice what I'm doing. Again, hopefully this is not, this is coming back to you. I'm underlining my verbs. But notice what I'm doing now is I'm putting the phrase underneath the word that it's modifying. So this phrase, God so loved the world, and then how did he love it? That he gave his only begotten son. Okay, and I put that under the verb that it's modifying. Okay, and then he gave his only begotten son. The reason,
That whoever.
or we could even say perhaps the result of giving his son is that whoever believes in him would not perish. Okay? Now, we have this last phrase. We might be able to increase this size a little bit.
Contrast.
Here we have this last phrase. What do we do with that?
The result.
Contrast shall not perish.
Yes, it's a conjunction here, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can enter after but.
Okay. Yeah, the but contrasts with shall not perish, but, and then I like to separate my conjunctions. And then this is the idea, right? They're two contrasting. Whoever believes in him, two things will happen. One, he won't perish. Two, he has eternal life. All right, so this also we would see as a result. It's a result of this action. Okay? So this diagram is just telling us, giving us a visual relationship, visual presentation of the relationship between the phrases. All right? Okay, so let's look at Psalm 99 together here and do it. All right? You guys ready?
Ready.
Here we
Ready.
go.
Ready or not?
Ready or not? Okay, now, one thing to keep in mind, the process for diagramming poetry is pretty much the same as, you know, the verse we just did was actually a statement made in John 3:16. The diagramming of poetry will be pretty much the same, except in poetry, again, remember this
Ellipsis. Yep.
this ellipsis, or we call elision. That is a word or phrase which is omitted, but still we assume or still acts as if it is there. If it is there. So we might say, he spoke with great authority, with awesome wonder. All right. This second line, again, makes no sense standing by itself unless we realize that implied is this, right? We understand that that's meant to be there, but for the sake, remember, poetry, the terseness, you know, brevity, shortness, of the phrases is one feature of Hebrew poetry, and that sometimes means phrases or words might be taken out, but still act as if they're there. All right? So we have to keep that in mind in the diagram. And also, two words that would connect phrases together. The connector words are often left out in Hebrew poetry. All right? Connector words are often, and we would say elided, which is just a form of ellipsis. Okay? They're often elided or omitted. Okay, and we'll see that in Psalm 99 here. Okay? All right, so let's remember our steps. The first is that we identify the phrases and clauses. And the second step is identify phrases and clauses by finding the connector words, okay? And then the next step is to, you guys remember? We're going to ask ourselves, what does the phrase or clause modify? And then finally, we will indent the phrase or clause under the word it modifies. What does the phrase and how does it modify? Okay? So these are the three steps we're going to do for Psalm 99. So let me do this. Let me go up here. And I meant to do this earlier, but I forgot. I'm going to cut and paste our psalm here. Just give me a moment. Okay. Let's take out the stuff in between. Okay. All right. So let's the first thing we're going to do here is we've already got the lines within the verse separated. Now we're just going to go through and treat it, and we're going to keep the stanzas together because, again, each stanza is like a paragraph, all right? So I'm going to keep a space between each stanza, and then all the rest of these verses will go together, okay? So you can see there, you see the three stanzas, all right? Now we're going to go through and identify each phrase looking for the connector words. Let me take out the highlighting here. Okay. All right, we're going to start with Charlie. Do you have does your sound work, Charlie? Not sure? Okay. William, you're up to the plate here. We're going to give you verse 1. What I want you to do is just tell me each word or phrase. You know, look for the connector words or punctuation.
Okay. Verse 1.
Yeah.
It's the clause 1, the Lord reigns.
Okay. So
Clause 2, let the peoples tremble.
Good.
Clause 3, he is enthroned above the cherubim. Clause 4, let the earth shake.
Okay, good. And what did you use to determine?
Obviously the punctuation, but most definitely the verbs.
Yeah, these are clearly 4 distinct statements, right?
Yeah.
Clauses, because they each have a verb, right? And let's go ahead and I'm just going to underline the verbs now. The Lord reigns, and then let tremble is a verb. He is enthroned above the cherubim, and then let
shake.
Okay, good. And then yeah, the punctuation helps. Yes.
I think the above is this preposition.
Okay. Yes. Good catch. Now, one thing to notice, we're going to do this, but notice above here is in italics. So what does that tell us?
It's interpretive.
added.
It was added.
It was added. It's interpretive. We're
Yes.
going to follow New American Standard for now on this. And what it's saying is just that literally the statement reads, he is enthroned the cherubim. That's the literal Hebrew. So the New American Standard says what's implied is that he's enthroned above the cherubim, because
Almighty.
God wouldn't be enthroned below or around. The idea from the context here is this idea that he's over the cherubim. Okay, but I always want you to pay attention to the little things. All right, because that's important. But yes, if in the English the word above here is a preposition, and so it would identify a separate phrase. Okay? Good catch. All right. Brother Rommel, can you do verse 2 for us?
Verse 2. The Lord is great in Zion. Okay.
Okay, that's one phrase or clause.
And.
Okay, and.
Center.
All right, that's where we break it here, right?
Yeah.
And he is exalted. Is
of all the peoples.
Okay, is there any break here?
He is exalted.
Okay, right here?
Above.
Yeah,
Below.
notice above. Above is, and in this case, it's not italicized, so it is in the text, and it is a preposition. All right, good. John, go ahead and take verse 3.
Let them praise your great and awesome name. And then,
See any connector words here?
and is there an elision there, Pastor Tim?
Let them praise
Oh,
your
no,
great.
no. Sorry.
It's together. So, but it's
Together.
and conjunction. All right, and then holy is he.
Holy. Yeah.
Yeah, that was pretty straightforward. All right. Now again, we have the punctuation here. Well, the first phrase we've separated at the word and because that's a connector word, and then we have the punctuation here. But also, it's a separate statement. Holy is he. Okay, so let praise. I'm just, oops, underlining my verbs as we go through here. All right, verse 4, Joshua.
Verse 4. The strength of the king, and then the strength of the king loves justice. I think that's already straightforward.
Yeah, technically this would be a phrase because of the word of, but well, let's keep it together because it really goes with strength, right? Yeah. Technically, though, it's a separate phrase, but it's the strength of the king.
Can you separate it from love of justice? Loves justice.
We could do this, yeah. The strength of the king loves, because technically of is a preposition here.
I think that would be.
All right. But what I like to do with the word of, it's so directly connected to the word before it, I usually just leave it as one. The strength of the king, I just leave it together. So let's just do that. Loves justice. Is this a separate phrase or clause? You've established equity?
One word, one sentence.
That's one sentence.
Yeah, it's one sentence, right?
Yeah.
And then, so the next break is at the line break. You have executed justice. Is there any break in this?
Yes. And.
And, right? Okay, good. We have a connector word, and. Any others?
No, none so far.
Did any of you guys see anything else?
In Jacob.
How about in Jacob?
Yep, in. There's a preposition there. That in sometimes sneaks by us, all right? But that's a separate phrase. Okay, good. Kenneth, you want to take verse 5?
Yes, Brother King. Exalt the Lord our God. That's one phrase. And second is and worship at his
Okay.
footstool.
Is this one phrase?
Yes.
All right,
Yes.
look again.
At
Yep, there's a connector word in there, at.
his footstool.
All right, and then holy is he.
Yes.
Now, one thing maybe you guys have noticed is with Hebrew poetry, because the poetry already separates each line, some of this has already been done for us.
Yes.
All right, so it makes it a little easier. But even within each line, notice that there are some prepositions here, like that word at, or above this word in. All right, so just stay aware of those. All right, Kenneth Kabanda, can you do verse 6?
Okay, Moses and Aaron
Okay,
were among his priests.
all right.
And then, and Samuel. So it's already down there among those who call on his name.
Okay, so we have a Samuel, and then this was among those, all right, it's together, but yes, who is a
Who
relative
called?
pronoun, isn't it?
Yeah.
And
And then they called upon the Lord. They called then upon the Lord. And he answered them.
all right, good. All right. Okay. Eric, can you try verse 7?
He spoke to them in the pillar of cloud.
Okay, is that one phrase, or do you see any connector words in there?
Of.
He spoke to them.
Okay, so we have in, that's a preposition, right? And then I heard somebody say of. Okay, they kept his testimonies. Is that one phrase? Does that need to be split up?
That's phrase.
Okay. And what about this one?
And that.
Yep, good. All right. MacDonald, why don't you take verse 8?
It was me, 13.
Oh, you did. Oh. Okay, Eric, you take verse 8.
He's cooking.
Oh, he's cooking. Oh, making you breakfast, huh? Or lunch? Okay. Emmanuel, are you there? Can you do verse 8 for us? Brother Emmanuel, are you there?
Yeah.
Hey, Pastor.
Try verse 8.
Exalt the Lord our God.
We're on verse 8. Sorry, brother. Verse 8.
O
one.
Lord our God, you answered them.
Okay, is there any break here?
God, then you answered them.
We have a comma there, and I think that is a correct place to break it. Anything here? Is this one phrase together, or
one phrase?
Is there a break here, or is this
one sentence?
One sentence.
One sentence.
And yet an avenger of their evil deeds. Is this one sentence? Of, that's right. Okay, what kind of avenger? All right. Very good. We'll go back up to German to do verse 9.
Okay, exalt the Lord our God, one sentence.
Okay.
And is the connector, at
Good.
connector.
All right, good.
For holy is the Lord our God, one sentence.
All right, very good. Okay, so now what we've done, notice here, men, is can't make it any smaller, is we've taken the passage and just broken it down by its phrases. Now all we got to do is figure out what each phrase is modifying and how it modifies it. So I'm going to do this, and we're going to put in a few tabs just to make it a little easier to give me a second to format this. Okay, so all I'm doing is just formatting my tabs, so when I indent the lines, it'll be easy to do. All right, so the first step was identify the phrases or clauses. Now we're going to do the second step and the third really together, and that is to identify what it modifies and then indent. All right, so we have this first statement, the Lord reigns. All right, and then let the peoples tremble. Those are independent sentences, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, they're not, the second line doesn't necessarily modify the first, or does it?
Nope.
Is there a connection between these two lines? We don't have a connector word, but remember what I told you, poetry is a little bit different in that it sometimes takes out those connector words. How does the second line relate to the...
So let the people tremble.
Yeah, I think there's an implied, therefore or so. Okay? It's the Lord reigns, therefore, therefore let the peoples tremble. See, really, this second
Result.
line really is modifying the first. Yeah, result. See that?
Yeah.
Now, this is interpretive, okay? But at this point, we know, again, this is where parallelism and understanding Hebrew poetry, we did this before, actually, when we were looking at parallelism. We were asking ourselves the question, what is the relationship between the lines? And here, that relationship is the Lord reigns, therefore the people should tremble, right? Let the peoples tremble. Okay? So these aren't really two independent statements. The second one is connected to the first one by this implied idea of result. Because the Lord reigns, the people should tremble. You guys see that? Any questions? So this is what I'm talking about. With poetry, we're going to have a lot of times the conjunctions or the connector words are not there, but they're implied. That's one of the features of poetry, again, is to try to be brief, terse, short. And by doing that, there'll be times where words are, especially conjunctions or connector words are left out. So actually diagramming Hebrew poetry is a little more challenging because you have to really understand the relationships, all right? Now, he is enthroned. That's another statement. We have it to the left, as we should, above the cherubim. What question does that answer, this phrase here? Now I'm going to expand this sequence.
Where?
So if it's answering a question where, is it going to modify a verb or a noun?
Verb.
Okay,
Verb.
which verb?
Enthroned.
Yeah, is.
Enthroned.
Is.
It tells us where he is enthroned. All right? Okay, good. And then we have this let the earth shake. Now, is that standing alone, or is there an implied connection here?
Same with the first one.
Same as it's an implied connection of
Enthroned.
therefore, or we could say so. Okay, and again, it's the result, just like in the previous line. All right, now I put brackets like this. When I add in words, I don't italicize them like the New American Standard. I put in brackets. And we'll just stick with therefore just to simplify our. Okay? All right. Any questions so far?
So clear.
Okay. Let's go to verse 2. Brother Ruel, why don't you take a look at verse 2. Guide us through it. How should we do this one? How does this second line relate to the first? Where do we put it on our diagram?
Mhm.
Is it modifying
The-
anything?
It's I think it's different statement
Yes. How do we know that?
because of the word and. It's
Very
different.
good. Very good. Yes. These are two parallel statements. The Lord is great and he is exalted. Now that's similar in structure to verse 1. Do you notice that? The Lord reigns and he is enthroned. But again, notice the and is left out.
Yeah.
You see how this, so really implied here is and. Okay, but again, for the sake of brevity, shortness, in Hebrew poetry, that it's not there. All right? But we can see the second verse, though, the poet includes the word and. The first verse, he doesn't, but it's still assumed to be there. The idea, the concept, right? We understand that there's the lexical meaning of words, and there's the semantic meaning of words. Okay, the lexical meaning is sort of the definition, okay, of the word. The Lord reigns. The definition of reign is, you know, he is king, he is sovereign over, he is ruler of. All right? Now the semantic meaning of words is the idea of it's not just the definition, but also the connotation or the idea of that statement. So for example, we understand the semantics as we put these phrases together. We understand that the Lord reigns and he is enthroned is two parallel ideas that really are connected with this idea of and, even though the word and isn't there. And we did it again here when we included that word therefore. The Lord reigns, therefore let the peoples tremble. That is, we're now looking at the semantic meaning of this verse, not just the lexical meaning, if you will.
Yeah.
Okay?
Implied.
It's the maybe the difference between the definition and this would be maybe more the idea of the understanding. You know, what is this saying? Not just going to my dictionary and looking up the meaning. Now, as I'm putting these words together, what is the idea behind this collection of words and phrases? Okay, so that's what we're doing here. We're just now, and this is very interpretive. Okay, so we need to understand that we're interpreting the idea that there must be a connection between the Lord reigns and let the peoples tremble. What is that connection? It would seem to be this idea of therefore, a result. Okay, and we're being upfront. We're saying this is interpretive. And then here in verse 2, the word and is directly given to us. So we know for sure these are two parallel statements. Okay, Brother Ruel, where does this next phrase above, where does that go?
Above is answering the question where is exalted. So that is below the verb is.
Very good. Wow. He's a diagramming scholar, Brother Ruel. I'll have you teach next time. Okay. Let them praise your great and awesome name. Holy is he. Narelle, let's have you do this one. Okay, we have let them praise. So that's a declaration. Is that modifying anything? Or is it a new statement, new sentence?
Identifying the name.
Okay, it's let them praise your great. Where do we do that? Does that stay here, or do we indent it?
Same verse 2.
We're in verse 3.
How he is exalted.
Say again.
The pattern same verse 2, Pastor Tim. And is in the middle.
Okay, so you would see this. Is that what you're saying?
No.
No.
And then awesome name below.
Yeah, so that would go where?
Below and. Praise.
Along with great.
Praise and then awesome name.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so great.
And
So it's let them praise your great name. Let them praise your awesome name. Okay, these are both parallel ideas. And technically, really it should be this. Let me get a little fancy here for you guys. I'll show you what I'm doing here. The main statement is let them praise your name. Okay, let me put in a line here. This is the convention I use. So technically the statement is let them praise your name. How do I? No. Sorry, give me a moment. I forgot. Oh, there it is.
Because it's great and awesome.
All right, there we go. Yes, it is what kind of name? Great name. Awesome name. So technically, these two words, great and awesome, modify name.
Adjective.
So I've indented them over name. Let them praise your name is the sentence, and then these two words, great and awesome, actually describe the name. What kind of name?
Adjectival.
Okay? So we're getting a little fancy in our diagram here. But do y'all see that? That great modifies name because it's answering the question, what kind of name? Awesome modifies name. Because again, it answers what kind. And then, holy is he. Is that a separate statement or is it somehow connected to what was said before?
It's a reason.
Yeah, I think it's connected. A reason. So that maybe the word for.
For.
He is holy. So
Or
what would it
because.
modify? If it's
praise.
Praise.
yes, very good. Let praise. So we'll put it under praise here. All right. See what I mean with poetry? There's an implied connection between these phrases that sometimes we aren't given the connector word that tells us that connection, but because it's poetry, we sort of understand that connection based upon recognizing that these phrases are shortened for the sake of being more poetic, but the connections between them are still there. All right. So notice we've seen that in a few places here. Up here, therefore was implied. Again, a therefore was implied. And
Pastor Tim,
yes.
can we insert between verse 2 and 3 again, therefore, because it's sort of the verse 2 and 3 are somewhat connected.
Oh,
Is it not?
he is exalted, therefore.
Yeah.
That's what I
It's
did
like,
actually in my diagram.
uh,
So I would put, therefore,
let them praise.
let them praise. So this is how I did it. And then for, oops. All right. I did it that way as well. Because for a couple of reasons. All right. Now this is again where in the original diagram, when you first did it, you may not see this, but notice, we've already noticed before that the connection between the first part of the stanza and the second part. Remember the pattern. There's these statements about God, and then the call to worship or praise, right? We see that in the first stanza. The second stanza, statements about God, and then the call to worship, exalt him. Verse third stanza, statements about God. He answered, he spoke, you answered, you were forgiving. And then a call to exalt and worship. All right? So we can see that each stanza ends with this implied connection that here's truths about God, and then the end of the stanza, therefore exalt and worship, therefore praise. All right? So I think this is a legitimate inclusion because we see a pattern here in the psalm. All right, so here's a good example where our diagram is informed by not just the words in each phrase, but also understanding the structure of the poem. All right, this is a little more advanced. This is advanced exegesis right here, men, because we're really digging into the structure of this poem and letting it help us interpret, really. All right. Do you guys see this? Are there any questions? Why this word therefore is in verse 3?
Modifies.
Okay, hopefully that's clear. All right, so already we're seeing, we didn't do this when we were diagramming epistles, because in an epistle, everything is written. The author doesn't omit any words because it's not poetic genre. He's just giving us direct, statements of fact or imperatives, commands, but in a direct fashion, because the genre in epistles is didactic, it's instructional. Okay, but in poetry, the genre is a little different. The idea is similar. He's making declarations about God and then commanding us to do something in response, but the form in which he presents it's more a poetic form. There's more brevity for the sake of quality and artistry, and there's more imagery. And so that's why when we do the diagram, we have to understand those grammatical concepts or semantical understanding needs to be applied to interpreting the poem when we do this diagram. Now, we need to check ourselves later when we consult resources. So, but this is
frozen.
Yeah. Are we frozen?
Internet.
Can you guys hear me? Hello? Uh-oh. Okay.